And now I will hand it over to Jeff. Take it away.
Thanks, Stephanie. Well, it's great to see everybody. I'm happy to be here and really excited to hopefully give you all some good fundamental financial planning advice and guidance on really what you should be thinking through for yourself when it comes to setting up the foundations for success for retirement planning or education planning for your kids, or just making sure that if I got sick and I couldn't work, would I be okay? Understanding budgeting, right? There's a lot of that stuff. We have 1 hour together. It's going to be really tough to get through all of that. But I promise you, I will be super high energy and quick on all of this stuff to try to teach you as much as I possibly can in the next 45 minutes to leave enough time for questions. So with that, there were some PDFs that I think we could probably follow up and send to everybody. I'm going to share my screen. We'll go through some of these PDFs together. I want to give you a quick overview of the PDFs and just some basic thoughts, and then really pass it off to you all to engage and ask for questions. The good news is there's not a crazy amount of people in this room, so be courageous, get off mute, ask questions. It's really not going to be, I'm not scary, I promise. So certainly ask all the questions you can think of or put it in the chat box, and we'll go through everything. With that being said, I'm going to share my screen and let's hit on the first topic, which is really what is financial planning and financial security. So financial planning is really this collaborative approach between you, your partner, your advisor, or somebody else that's helping you with your financial planning to come up with what are all of our goals, hopes, and dreams for the future, and then road mapping out how do we get to those goals, generally with the least amount of risk possible. You can be aggressive when it comes to your risk tolerance, but it's not like we want to go to Vegas every weekend and put our whole paycheck on black or red on the roulette table and hope we double it or we lose it all, right? So it's how do we get to our goals with the least amount of risk possible? So that way, we don't have to be as worried about our money. And so what does financial planning really look like is I'd like to make the analogy of building a house, right? When you build a house, you don't start with the swimming pool in the backyard or the movie theater in the basement. You start with making sure you pour a solid foundation. My poor cousin, love the guy. He didn't realize the house he was building, he was literally building his house on quicksand outside of Pittsburgh. And they were already $90,000 in on the foundation of this house. And then they had an engineer come and test the soil and realized they cannot continue building on this house. It'll collapse in 5 years. And they had to restart that whole house. They're already out $90,000, $100,000, I think, on the foundation pour, plus everything they had done to that point. Not getting that money back. So let's use my cousin's example as why you pour a solid foundation and you have a solid footing, because stuff happens and we want to make sure that your house can stand up to a hurricane or something like that. So what are the foundational components to a financial plan? And it's really all of these bullet points here that you see. We're going to spend some specific time on budgeting because that might be the most critically important part of understanding your financial situations, to understand what goes in and what goes out every month. I've got a lot of great rules of thumb and ratios and numbers for you all to be aware of. So foundational point number one, create a solid budget. The next thing is emergency fund planning. What is an emergency fund? It is simply having cash sitting in a bank account, hopefully not at Silicon Valley Bank or First Republic. But outside of those two, there's certainly a lot of other strong banks. There's also FDIC insurance up to $250,000. So have your 3 to 6 month emergency fund sitting in a bank account. What's 3 to 6 months? Of your bills. So when we actually talk about your budget, you'll see how you calculate what the number is that you need to multiply by 3 or multiply by 6 to create your emergency fund. Now, some rules of thumb on the emergency fund is this: if you are married filing jointly, you probably only need about 3-ish months. If you are single or have variable income, 6 months is more your number. And then generally, if you have children, I add a month per child you have. So if you're married filing jointly, you probably need 3 months. But if you have 2 kids, kids are expensive and stuff happens. So maybe you have 5 months. So that's what we're looking at, 3 to 6 months there for the emergency fund. We want to make sure we have a smart strategy on paying down debt. Now, there is, I think, a lot of, and especially in the South, there's a big following of Dave Ramsey. And I think Dave Ramsey has a lot of good financial planning advice when it comes to getting out of credit card debt or managing your spending. But a smart strategy to pay down debt does not mean I don't start saving until I have no debt. In fact, that could be one of the worst decisions you would make. You have to invest and pay down debt simultaneously. The only thing that you really kind of put saving and investing on hold for is if you carry a lot of credit card debt. If you have $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 of credit card debt at 23% interest, really the only investing we should be doing is getting the matching contribution your employer's giving you in your work-sponsored retirement program. So smart strategies on paying down debt. That really means prioritizing credit card debt and consumer debt. Student loans and mortgages, hitting on that really quickly. Student loans and mortgages are really not bad debt. Your student loans, if they're like a Sallie Mae loan or a Wells Fargo or Discover Bank loan that have 10% plus interest rates, that's not good. We need to look at refinancing those or getting better rates. But you don't really need to panic, pay down your mortgage or anything like that if the interest rates are relatively low. Now, retirement contributions, again, I kind of already alluded to this. The one thing that's always the non-negotiable is if you are not getting all of the matching contribution your employer gives you, you're lighting money on fire. That is literally you just wasting your compensation. So let's just use this really for my mental math sake for you all today. Say you make a $100,000 salary and your employer gives you a 5% match if you put in 5%. That means if you put in $5,000, they'll give you $5,000. You have to look at that match as part of your compensation package. So somebody that makes a $100,000 salary with a 5% match, I really look at it like they make $105,000 a year because they should be taking advantage of that. The other way to look at that too is this. That is the only guaranteed rate of return you will ever make on your money. It's a guaranteed 100% rate of return. You put in 5,000, you get 5,000. You double your money every year with no risk because the match is guaranteed until they change the plan document. So that is absolutely critical to take advantage of that. Following from that, kind of getting more into insurance programs that are really important to a family. The one that's most critical is disability insurance, I would say. And the reason why is this: unless you are independently wealthy or have a trust fund that backs you up and you really just work because you love what you do and not because you need the paycheck, which that is some people out there. If that's not you and you have to work for a paycheck, then making sure you have your paycheck guaranteed. So whether you're sick or injured and you can't go to work tomorrow, that you're going to make your same paycheck, that's really important. So even through a great organization like UNCG, or you pick any of the major employers in Greensboro, nobody's group disability plan is better than 60 to 66% of your compensation, generally taxable to you. So let's keep with this $100,000 salary just because it's nice round numbers. That would mean somebody with a $100,000 salary only has $60,000 of their income covered, generally taxable to them, meaning that if you make a $100,000 salary and you get sick and you can't work and all you have is your group plan at the office, your take-home pay is probably now $48,000 a year, and you make $100,000. How does that impact your financial future? It greatly reduces your ability to save, and you might only be able to cover your expenses, and oftentimes maybe not because your bills have gone up because you're sick. So disability insurance planning, very important because we need to make sure you can always continually save and invest for your future. Life insurance planning, especially if you're married or have children, becomes critically important, or have aspirations to be married and have children or buy a house. Life insurance obviously protects your loved ones. Should you pass away, a death benefit goes to them to be able to maintain a similar standard of living as the one you are currently getting used to. Additionally, it could be used as another way of creating like an emergency savings, but mostly its use is to take care of those around you, to pay off all of your debts and pay for final expenses, and really just make sure nobody's burdened by that. I mean, your loved one's already just lost you, and that's going to be emotionally devastating. Don't let there be financial devastation or issues as well. Health insurance, every major employer is going to be giving you good health insurance. Just a little bit of a quick thought here. The younger and healthier you are, the more you can go with like a high deductible plan with cheaper premiums and more out-of-pocket costs should you get sick or hurt. And if you have more pre-existing conditions, if you already go to the doctor regularly due to some type of ailment you might have, having a more comprehensive program is going to make more sense. If you have access to an HSA plan through one of these high deductible programs, HSAs, health savings accounts, one of the best places that you can save money. It's actually the only account that works this way, where you get a tax deduction to put money in an HSA. You have the money grow without taxes as well every year. And then when you take the money out for a qualifying purpose, which would be a health-related issue, it's tax-free for that as well. So it's actually the only account where there's not tax anywhere if used appropriately. Tax deductible on the way in, deferred as it grows, tax-free on the way out. So really important, if you have access to an HSA and you're on a high deductible plan, you should absolutely be taking advantage of that. And then finally, your property and casualty insurances. Like, we want to insure against the things that we really can't afford to lose, like a house, right? If you have a $300,000 or $400,000 house and it burns down, it's not like you have 300, 400 grand that you could probably just part ways with to buy another one, right? So having homeowners insurance, very important. There's different types of homeowners policies. We don't need to dive too into it today, but I'll just tell you, everybody here should have an HO3, most likely. There's HO2, HO3. You want an HO3 contract. So if you own a home, look at if you have an HO2 or an HO3. You want an HO3. That's more of a comprehensive type homeowners coverage. Additionally, with your car, I think it's really important to, I'll share a quick story that's super personal. My wife got hit by a guy who fell asleep at the wheel head on 2 years ago, shattered her collarbone. And it was real. And we just got her a new car at the time too. So it was a 1-month-old car, and she gets hit head on by a guy who falls asleep at the wheel. He did not carry nearly adequate insurance coverage. He only had $50,000 of liability coverage and property coverage. My wife's car was 50 grand, and the medical bills tallied up to about $85,000 after it was all said and done for the surgeries for her collarbone. Thank goodness we have underinsured motorist coverage on our own personal policies. So we obviously, all $50,000 that guy had, we took, because that was like, the other company, the insurance company, didn't even fight it. They're like, yeah, he's out. So here's all the money. If we didn't have underinsured motorist coverage through our own policies, we would not have been made whole on all of this. So really important, you carry higher limits than state minimums here in North Carolina. The state minimums are incredibly low. If you get in any type of real wreck, you will be in a world of hurt if you only carry state minimum car insurance. I would recommend at least 100, 300, 100, those split limits, 100, 300, 100. Really is the absolute minimum you should carry. And you might decide to get a little bit higher coverage because it doesn't cost a lot. All right, so that's foundational pieces there. As far as strategies for growth, once we have the foundation, where do we build from there? Well, we got to make sure that if we have any really short-term goals outside of our emergency fund, let's just say we need to buy a new car next year. Ours is on our last leg, or we know the HVAC unit needs replaced next year, or the fridge needs replaced. Anything that's within like 12 to 24 months from now, we really just want to build up an emergency, like an extra savings outside of your emergency fund for those objectives. 1 to 2 years from now is too short term to run the risk of investing that money in anything that could go up and down in the markets. From that, though, once we get past 2 years, say we're trying to buy a house in 5 years, or we're trying to, buy a beach house, or we'd like to take a 3-month sabbatical from work 5 years down the road, something like that. That's something that's far enough away from now that you can invest dollars. You can open a non-qualified brokerage account, is what that would be called. It's just a regular investment account that a lot of people use, like Robinhood or Acorns or stuff like that. We generally don't recommend day trading or buying and selling individual stocks for most people, because they're not, quite frankly, there's just a lot of proof that individuals that do that lose more money than they make. So we would just recommend buying and holding diversified investments for these midterm goals and saving adequately for those objectives. For long-term goals, this could be things like saving for your kids' education. So 529 plans, or that's a kid's education account. You can use life insurance, like I mentioned, as like a backup emergency savings. That's good for long-term objectives because it grows without taxation. And then obviously we have our retirement accounts between 401ks and 403bs at work, Roth options within those, Roth IRAs or traditional IRAs and annuities. And so really all of these things married together, right? So based on your goals and your budget is what helps us create a solid financial plan. All right. So I'm going to pause there. That's really kind of the overview foundation. Then we'll dive into kind of credit scores and budgets here in a moment, but I'll pause here for any questions we might have. So far looks good.
Hey, Jeff, I have a quick question for you.
Sure.
One came in, it says, how much is too much to have in a checking account? Is there a ratio so I can determine how much money is safe to move into investments without sacrificing security?
Great question. So remember that 3 to 6 months of your fixed expenses to sit in an emergency fund. So if you have your emergency fund taken care of, that doesn't mean carry $100,000 in your checking account on top of the 3 to 6 months in your emergency fund. You don't really want to have more than about 2 months of your bills in your checking account, because what happens psychologically is you create this comfort zone of seeing all of this cash sitting there. And you actually will subconsciously spend more money than you mean, because you're like, oh, cool, I got 20,000 in my checking account. Like, all right, yeah, I can go spend $400 here, and that's not going to hurt you, right? So you actually want to keep your checking account to like 1 or 2 months of your operating costs, have your 3 to 6 months in your emergency fund, and then really the rest of it should be invested. Good question. All right.
One more question.
Sure.
Coming in from a student, how can a student manage their finances while in college, assuming they don't make too much as a professional? What would you recommend?
Yeah, the best thing to do as a student is to understand what goes in and what goes out. So budgeting, which we're going to talk about here in a minute, very important, because the main thing as a college student is not just survival a little bit, but survive through and not accrue credit card debt, and hopefully build up a bit of an emergency fund by the time you graduate. If you work part-time, if you had an internship that's paid like ours or whatever, you have some income coming in, then you should try to build up that emergency fund. So when you graduate, you have a nice clean slate, right? You have no consumer debt, you have a little bit of emergency savings that can bridge your gap to your full-time job. And then you're building from a solid foundation already. You're not using that first year. What I often see, most of my clients now are doctors or physician assistants. So most of my clients are in medicine. And when they get through 2, 3, 4 years of training, residency, et cetera, they have to sacrifice that first 12 to 24 months of their income to basically dig themselves out of the hole they put themselves in during that time, because they just spent more than they made. So I would make the coaching and follow a budget, try to build up emergency savings. So that way you start with a good clean slate. Cool. All right. So let's talk through budgets. I think budgeting, again, supremely critical. You have to think about yourself like a business. If a business spends more money than it makes, it goes out of business, right? If a business makes more money than it spends, it can reinvest those dollars in R&D and invest for the future, be innovative with products, et cetera. So we got to run our financial plans like a business. So how do you break down a budget? The 60-20-20 budgeting philosophy is really a great rule of thumb. It's not perfect, but this is absolutely better than what most things you'll find on the internet when it comes to budget planning. So we want to design our life around 60% of our income. So if you make a $100,000 salary, net of taxes, you probably bring home somewhere like $5,500 to $6,000 per month because taxes. So What we're trying to design our lifestyle around is 60% of that take-home number. So bring out the old calculator here. If you bring $6,000 in per month, then that's $3,600 is actually what you're trying to live off of. Now that $3,600, how is that broken down, or what's the percentages we should be thinking through? Housing. We don't want our housing costs to be really more than 30% of our net income. So on $6,000, it's like $1,800 a month, ideally for housing. Now, if you are married, have a partner you're splitting bills with, then you can combine your household income to determine what 30% of your household income is. And then that changes how much you can afford. But you really don't want your rent or mortgage, and you really want your utilities to be factored into that as well. You don't want that to be more than 30% of your take-home pay. Additionally, groceries, not eating out. Very important to discriminate between the two. Eating out costs, even if you go to McDonald's on the dollar menu all the time, it is better off and cheaper and definitely healthier if you grocery shop a little bit more. So groceries should be somewhere between 5 and 10% of your net income. You make $6,000 a month. That's somewhere between $300 and $600 for grocery shopping. 10% is generally going to be more the number there. As far as other budget busters, we constantly see is car payments and car insurance. Ideally, your car payment and car insurance is no more than 10% of your net monthly income as well. And I bet you some of you immediately like, oh boy. Yeah, because if you make $6,000 a month of take-home pay, that means between your car insurance and car payment, it should not be more than $600. We often see that being a massive budget buster for a lot of young professionals and older professionals alike. It's pretty non-discriminate. People generally buy cars they can't afford. So 60, 20, 20. So we got the 30% goes towards housing, 10 for groceries, 10 for the car payments. So that leaves another 10% for essential expenses. And that's really where childcare cost or personal care cost or all these other things you see here that you have to pay for out of pocket. You're trying to find a way to keep that as close to 10% as possible, which then leaves 20% for discretionary expenses and other fun things. And you can see just examples listed there of what we would consider discretionary. I see a lot of people pay $240 a month for their cell phone plan for just themselves. Not even sure how that's possible. I guess unlimited data, like I can go use my phone overseas and it's not an issue either. But we see a ton of people spend a lot of money on their phones. Obviously, eating out, a major component to a budget. Professional dues or like clubs, going to Grasshoppers games or Swarm games, etc. Those would be discretionary expenses. But now that's a pretty big chunk of income, 20%. So again, on $6,000, we're talking about $1,200 a month that you can put towards all of those items there. So a strategy could be, let's just say you love cars. Well, if you really love cars and you want to spend like 14% of your income or 15% of your income on cars, can we lower your discretionary expenses down from 20 to 15? And then you freed up the money that you can buy a nicer car if you'd like, but you have to realize you might have to say no to a vacation that your friends invite you on or something like that, which then would leave us 20% for saving. Now, while I've talked about this last, I'll give you kind of a quick tip here. You have to save and invest first, or you'll never be good with money. I promise you, you won't be good with money if you try to save what's left over. You have to save first. But the 20% that's left is what we need to dedicate towards your planning, whether that's extra retirement savings, building the emergency fund, saving for kids' education. It is okay for part of your 20% to go towards like personal insurance premiums or paying down debts more aggressively. It's really about putting 20% of your income towards your financial plan. And that's how we break it down from a budget standpoint. All right, so I'll pause there on the budgeting sheet and turn it over to y'all for questions here.
Hey, Jeff. So we did receive comment that this really reinforces how we should be utilizing our finances. But as you mentioned, it is more of a template, because if you do want to spend more in one area, you just kind of have to shift those percentages, right?
Yeah, if you want to live in, the nicest, if you want to live right down here at Greenway at Stadium Park, like right behind me, or Carroll at Belmead, right? And you're going to spend $1,500 or $1,600 a month on a 2-bedroom apartment or a 1-bedroom apartment. Bet you somebody on here probably lives down there. These are great places. I lived at Greenway at Stadium Park my first year after I graduated. So they're wonderful places. They're just very expensive, right? So if you're going to spend more on rent, you got to realize the money isn't just going to magically appear unless you work in a job that's incentive based. You can make a lot more money, right? And so if you know you're going to spend more on rent, the money's got to come from somewhere, and you really shouldn't be taking it away from your future self. One of the best examples I've ever heard from a professor at the American College, where I was studying for one of my advanced degrees in planning. He had said that every dollar that you save for your retirement or a future goal is like putting $1 in an envelope and mailing it to your future self. And on the first of that month, when you need that money, that envelope shows up with all of that cash. And so we really can't neglect our future selves. And so sometimes it's very easy for young professionals to overemphasize, I'm young, I want to live now, and I don't want to save for my future. And look, I'm guilty of it too. I'm 29. I'm guilty of it. Over the last 8-9 years of my professional life, it's been tempting to want to buy things that I probably shouldn't purchase, because it's like, oh, cool, I make money, I deserve to do this. But you really got to make sure you don't make your 50-year-old self really mad at your 25-year-old self for the decision that you made. It's trying to balance those two people together. But yeah, it's a great point. Any other thoughts here on budgets?
Are those percentages based off gross or net income?
Plan them off of net income. We find that's the easiest way to start. And if we have to mess around with these numbers, depending on your salary and your situation, but start with your take-home pay and do these ratios based on your take-home income.
And then one last question that just came in. With high mortgage interest rates now, it is advisable to take fixed ARM loan, 5 or 7 year, and wait for mortgage to go down in the future? Great
question. So do we go with a fixed rate mortgage right now, or do we do a variable adjustable rate mortgage, right? An ARM. What do we do? Well, if you are going to buy right now, an ARM might not be a terrible idea that maybe has a 5 or 7+ year lock on the rate that you're at right now, in case rates stay elevated a little while longer. Buying a house right now is really, it's just like World War III out there to buy a house. It's not exactly the greatest time. Quite frankly, if you're not just chomping at the bit to get out because you've outgrown where you're living, if you're in a suitable living arrangement at this given moment and you're like, I think I just want to buy a house, I'd probably advise you not to do that. Buying a house, if you actually, I'm not sure where this has kind of come from, but a Yale economist did a study on the last basically 60 years of home ownership. If you factor in the average cost of owning a house and the maintenance on the house, at the time, I think he just did an average 5% interest rate on the mortgage. The real rate of return on buying a house was less than 2%, meaning you really only made about a 1.8% rate of return. It basically didn't even keep up with inflation net of costs. So there is this misconception out there that buying a house is a good investment. I'll just say this about a house. You need one to live, right? It's utility. You don't buy houses as an investment. You buy them because you need one, right? So if you have a good living arrangement right now, probably not a good idea to buy a house in the grand scheme of things. If you plan on staying in a house for right now, based on interest rates where they're at, you really want to buy a house for at least, you can see yourself staying in it for 5+ years minimum. Buying a house and selling it in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I just had a meeting with a physician yesterday. This is just really applicable. A new physician couple in Charlotte I'm working with. They bought an $800,000 house, which was only 2,500 square feet in Charlotte because it's so expensive in Charlotte. They're doing a physician loan, so they're putting no money down on it. Okay, they're going to pay in the first 5 years on this $800,000 house. Their mortgage over the 5 years is $291,000 that they'll pay. They will only pay the principal down $50,000 in the first 5 years, $240,000 of interest. How is that a good investment? I just don't know. So it's really tough for me right now. I want you to be happy as a client. I want you to live in the house that you want to live in, but just truly take stock. If you'll be there for more than 5 years, great. That makes it a lot better of a decision. An adjustable rate mortgage right now could make sense if it has a decent lock on how long the rates will be locked in. And then you could refinance to a fixed rate at a later point in time. That could make sense. Hopefully I didn't scare everybody out of buying a house, but I do think there's a lot of negative pressure. Your parents probably told you the best place that you could say, don't rent anymore, buy a house. Buying a house is a good investment. And if you really do truly look at it, buying a house, you just need it for utility. Hopefully that's helpful. Cool. Awesome. All right. Let's wrap it up on credit scores and we'll do open Q&A. So credit scores, there is this incredible amount of people that believe putting money on a credit card and then carrying a balance and just paying the minimum payment monthly is how you show the credit rating agencies that you can handle credit, and that builds your credit score. That is shockingly a story that a lot of young people believe, and that could not be further from the truth. You have to pay off your credit cards every single month. Never pay $1 of interest on a credit card ever, 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 if possible. All right, so how is your credit score calculated? Here it is straight from FICO. So here it is. Really, it's your payment history is the number one most important piece to what calculates your credit score. If you have a single missed payment, it stays on your report for 7 years. So like there are some mistakes that we make in our credit when we're young that you just will not be able to improve until enough time has passed. That's why credit and understanding how it works is so important when you're young, because some of these mistakes will literally, if you missed a payment at 20, you're buying a house at 27, it's on your record at 27 years old, you have a missed payment still. So don't miss any payments. That's really critically important. Always pay on time. You got to always pay at least the minimum payment. My recommendation is always pay the full balance every single month. In fact, I pay my own personal credit cards twice per month. Every time I get paid, I wipe them out every time. So I pay them off in full twice per month. So there's no shot of ever missing a payment. The next thing is amount owed. This I also hear a terrible misnomer is, oh yeah, just put a ton of stuff on the credit card to show the credit rating agencies that I use my credit. Well, it's important to show them that you use credit, but you do not want to get even close to putting on more than 30% of your credit limit on a credit card. So for my mental math again, if you have a $10,000 credit limit, then you should not ever really put more than $3,000 on that card at any point. 3,000 or less, pay it off, pay it off. Closing out a card is a negative impact because it raises the percentage of available credit. In fact, what's kind of fun is just applying for new credit cards and applying for credit limit increases with zero intention of using it. So in fact, I mean, just in the air of total transparency, I don't put more than like maybe $2,000 to $4,000 every 2 weeks on my credit cards for my business cost and my personal living, because I put everything on the credit cards. Okay. But I keep asking for all the credit agencies to continue to increase my limits. I think right now I have somewhere like $160,000 of available credit between like all 10 credit cards I've accumulated over the last decade. But I use like $4,000. I have a $160,000 credit limit. So it makes me look like I use a 2% utilization or a 1% utilization on my credit. And so they're never going to look at me like I'm over dependent on credit. Length of credit history. This is something, again, that's age sensitive. This is one of those things you can't trick the system to give you a better score. That's why if you don't have a credit card and you're in school, the first thing you should do is go get a student credit card to prove that you have credit. The longer you have credit, the better off you will be. Type of credit mix is just, student loans, car payment, credit cards. So your mix impacts your credit. You have a mortgage, and then amount of new credit. This is why I'll ask for a credit limit increase or I'll apply for a new credit card once every 12 to 24 months, is just because I'll get maybe a sign-on bonus or perks. They want to see that I'm applying for new credit. I use it for a little while. Maybe I don't use it later on, but it's really just those components. Those are the 5 components that really dictate your credit score. Now, what's important to know, I think this might have a spectrum on here. Maybe not. Maybe it does on the first page. Yeah. This was outdated. This was Northwestern hasn't made an updated one of these in a long time. But in 2015, the national average credit score was 695. But I do want to make sure you all know this number right here, 760. This hasn't changed. You do not need perfect credit. You just need a 760 and above. So do not go down this like war path of I have to get an 850 credit score. It doesn't matter. Anything over 760 gets treated the same exact way. Just always keep it at 760 or above. Don't get upset. Like my wife, it's so funny. Well, she'll like, what's your credit score? I got my credit report today. And she's like, mine's an 810. What's yours? I'm like, 812. And she gets so upset. She's like, oh my gosh, why is yours too higher than me? I'm like, Lindsay, it's okay. We're both over 760. It doesn't matter. So it really just genuinely doesn't matter. Just keep it above 760. All right. Cool. That is really just your quick hits on credit scores. And again, this PDF can be available to you all to review all of the stuff as well. So I am done preaching. Hopefully you got some good takeaways, but I'd love to pass it off to y'all for any other questions that you might have. You got it, Carletta.
We do have a few that came in through the chat, so I'll go ahead and address those while everyone's thinking. If buying a house is not the good investment, then what is? Yeah,
so buying a house, remember, net of costs maybe doesn't create the rate of return that people think it does, right? I mean, like, for instance, we could just use my own house for an example. I bought my house in 2016 at the Cardinal here in Northwest Guilford County. I paid $187,000 for my house. I put a 10% down payment on it, and I have a 3.625% mortgage, fixed interest rate. You know, I've paid for my house over the last like 7 years. My 7 years of mortgage payments is essentially, I'm at like 95. I'm basically at about $100,000 now I've paid for my house. I've replaced an HVAC unit for $8,800, a rotting back porch for $4,000. I put in a backyard fence for about $3,000. You know, all these costs. I'm in my house now about $130,000. I've paid my mortgage down from like $168,000 to $130,000. You know, now the house is probably worth $50,000 to $80,000 more, depending, I guess, on what's going to go on in the market. But good investments, you know, the stock market's probably the simplest and easiest way to create wealth with you having to do absolutely nothing. So obviously, I'm a pretty big proponent of that, being that's my business that I'm in. But really, buy a house if you're going to be there long-term, because long-term it is going to be better than renting. It's the short-term house purchase right now that's probably a really not good idea. The long-term house ownership, good strategy, but it's not an investment, because you're not going to, when you retire, can you like sell your living room to buy groceries? No, right? It's good to not have a mortgage in retirement and you own your house outright. That's a good strategy. But hey, a house is an asset, but it's not liquid. So stock market investments, obviously, I'm a big proponent of. Rental real estate, if you're going to buy a house to rent it, that is also another good way of using real estate as an investment. That's actually how you use real estate as investments, is you rent it. Hopefully helpful there. Going to the next one.
Yeah, for the next one, let's see. What advice would you give clients who are late to the game for planning for retirement?
Yeah, I mean, the number one most important thing is maximize your employer match in your retirement plan. You always got to get the free money, always. But it's generally going to be to max out as much as you can the retirement plan you have at work. If you have a 403B or a 401k, you can put $22,500 a year into that. If you're under 50, over 50, now you can put $30,000 into that plan. So I would really strongly encourage to look at your budget, make as many necessary cuts as you possibly can. And then really it's to try to maximize your employer sponsored contributions. If you are very confident because you feel very behind that your income now is going to be way higher than the income you're going to live on in retirement, pre-tax contributions to those plans are a good idea. You get the deduction today, you pay taxes on it later. But kind of on the flip side, a Roth contribution, that money's all tax-free when you take it out, which does make that dollar stretch a little further. So I'd probably prioritize pre-tax contributions, but I would not totally rule out, depending on your situation, using Roth dollars if you have that option.
Fantastic. Any thoughts on buying T-notes or bills with a portion of your emergency fund?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So this is why SVB just went out of business. If you have a liquidity need and you have to sell, so what happens with treasuries and bond prices when yields rise? Bonds and yields have an inverse relationship. Rates go up, bond prices go down. So the reason why SVBs had this liquidity crisis, which caused the run on the bank, which caused them to go under, was that they had all of their tier one safe capital in treasuries. Well, when the Fed keeps raising rates, bond prices keep going down. I won't bore you with the logistics on why that happens. That's just how bonds work. So what happens right now, though, is what are going to happen with interest rates for the rest of this year? They're going to go up or going to go down? And the Fed has announced that they're going to try to continue to raise rates to get inflation under wraps. So that means if you buy a treasury right now, I can almost guarantee to you the price of that treasury at the end of the year will be less than where it is now. If you have a liquidity event and you need to get to the money, you'll have to sell the treasury, give up the interest, and you're going to take less in return. So treasuries and bonds or any investment that is not a money market fund cannot count as an emergency fund because there is still risk even within treasuries. Hopefully that was not too over the top, but a very topical example with Silicon Valley Bank going out of business, basically because of treasuries.
Yeah, fantastic answer. In your opinion, what is the most common financial mistake you see young or college professionals make, and how can it be avoided?
Buying cars they can't afford. Very, very regularly is one of them. And I do think there is a real issue with young people not viewing themselves as an older person. There was a study done that if a young professional looks at themselves like on a Snapchat filter that makes them look older, and then make them enroll in their 401k plan the next day, they will save 2% more than if they didn't see that picture. So I do think that young people want to live for today, neglect tomorrow. And the problem is you're going to have a tomorrow. I mean, I get tomorrow is not promised, but it's just not prudent planning to neglect your future. So I would say that would be my coaching there. Look at yourself on a Snapchat filter older and then immediately make financial decisions afterwards.
Yeah, maybe we should all do that after if we haven't already.
There you go.
What is the greatest financial planning tip for college students, young professionals?
I'd say the budget, just knowing what goes in versus what goes out and tracking that is critically important because you're building habits in college that will then carry into your first professional career, which will carry with you the rest of your life. So always build the habit of spending less money than you make.
Anybody else feel free to jump in at any point. I'm kind of going through what was put in the chat. Follow-up question to as far as buying a house goes. If you currently own a house, when is the best time to sell and when is the best time to buy? Because you mentioned obviously not right now is not the best time to buy. Is it the best time to sell? And how do you go between that if you're living in your house until you buy another one?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is another reason why you really can't look at your house as an investment, because if it's your primary residence and you sell it, what do you have to do now? You're selling at the top of the market, you're buying at the top of the market. So that's why, again, it's utility. Don't look at the house as the investment. Don't try to time it. If you love your house, Sure, the market's higher now, but if you don't have to leave and your house is totally suitable for your needs, stay in your house. Because if you sell at the high, you're buying at the high. There's no real way of like selling a primary residence high and then buying low. The only way you do that is if you have rental properties. Now, what happened over the last couple of years is we had clients that had seen these prices of their rental properties skyrocket, and they maybe wanted to find an exit strategy to get out of the rental game. Well, perfect opportunity. The market's skyrocketing. People are fighting and going way over asking price. And that's the time to maybe offload a rental property. But yeah, for your primary residence, let it be about your life. Let it not be the financial decision. Let it be about your family. Cool. What else?
All right, I've got one last question, and then anybody else, please feel free to chime in. What do you like most about your job and your career experiences?
I love my job. Genuinely, sometimes feel guilty to get to do what I do at 29 years old and get to see people and help people for a living with this stuff. So I genuinely love my opportunity to try to educate people, protect their families. Like, for instance, I just had to pay my first disability claim to a client. I had a pharmacist, 42 years old. She had a stroke last October, basically on Halloween last year. And it's incredibly sad. And she's not going to be able to go back to work full time for a while. And so I'm super thankful that she listened to me to protect her paycheck, because now I know her son's in college. She can still afford to pay his tuition costs. And if we wouldn't have done the planning we would have done, I don't think her son would be able to go through college without student loans. So I find that to be really rewarding, that I just get to help people. Obviously, like, we're not a good fit for everybody, but I think at the end of the day, I just hope to teach and genuinely help people stop making mistakes on their own planning as much as I can. And I get paid to do that. And that's pretty cool. And I get to be my own boss. And, all these layoffs that are out there, there's zero chance I get laid off because I run my own business. Like, this is me captaining my ship. So, it's really cool. So I'm quite lucky. At least I feel it. Alex, it looks like you have a question with the hand.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, current client of yours. My wife's got a disability policy with you all.
Yeah.
So my question's not related to that though. Was wondering if you had any tips or tricks with credit cards. They all have nowadays these fancy pie charts, and they break out your spending into different categories, such as transportation and some of the categories you talked about earlier with budgeting.
Right.
And like you, we've got a handful of different credit cards, and find that they all don't match up, and so we're still going back to reconcile at the end of the month or quarter, or whatever it is, and having to dig through the individual payments and try to figure all that stuff out. Any tips or tricks to make that a little bit faster or easier?
It's a great question. So I have found that if you use the credit card for specific purchases all the time, you know what that card's for, this card's for, that card's for. And that can sometimes give you a better direction of like, all right, every time I eat out, I only use this credit card because it gets the most cash back for eating out. I only use this card for traveling. So there's no real, like, for instance, if you're a client of our firm, there's a Northwestern Mutual app and you can link everything up there and it tracks your spending. There's also Mint. You can use the Northwestern app even if you're not a client, actually, too. But Northwestern app, Mint app, there's a ton of budget tracking apps that if you link the credit cards to, it kind of gives you a more global look. But Alex, I found that oftentimes shopping is categorized differently. So it's sometimes tough to do that. So if you really want to get a truly defined look at it, you are going to probably have to manually go through. But I have found it streamlines it if you use cards for specific things.
Yeah, and we did that a little bit already. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry I wasn't more helpful. Good to see you too, by the way. Yeah, You Need a Budget is an app that I've seen. Yep. Is that free? I think that's free. You need a budget. There might be a paid version. There's enough free ones out there. You probably don't have to pay. Cool. One last thing I'd love to share. I'll share my screen real quick on this as well. If this has been helpful. Now, this is actually not about working with me as an advisor. This is actually about the career opportunity with the firm. So if you are interested in talking more about the career opportunity, so that's like Stephanie had mentioned at the beginning, that's part of my role now that I'm most excited about is growing new advisors and helping grow our footprint here in Greensboro and retaining top talents. And not everybody from UNCG moves to Charlotte or Raleigh. I'd like for them to stay here. And so we're absolutely growing this year. We're looking at bringing on another 4 to 5 advisors for our Greensboro firm. We've brought on 2. So I think 3 more spots left this year to join the firm. We also have an awesome internship opportunity. I would have not found the Northwestern career without the internship opportunity. The left-hand QR code is an interest form and like, tell me about the career. The right side, culture index, this could be for anybody, whether you're in the career field you're in now, you're trying to figure out like if what I'm doing right now is a good fit for me or not. And I'd be happy to go through this with anybody. The culture index is like a 5 to 10 minute survey that you can take that basically just asks you 2 questions. The first one is describe yourself. Pick all the words that describe you. And then the second question is pick all of the words to describe you at work. And then what you're looking for on the results is there overlap or not? Or are you a totally different person at work than who you naturally are? And obviously, if that's the case, then your job satisfaction probably won't be the greatest. So, our partnership with UNCG goes way back. We always want to be involved and help as much as we can. So even if you're like not wanting to be a financial advisor, but you just want to figure out if the career trajectory you're on is the right one for you or not, certainly feel free to scan that in. We're happy to talk you through where you're at career trajectory wise. So I wanted to share that with you all also. Cool. All right, Stephanie, I think I've covered it all.
I think so. Fantastic job, Jeff. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Northwestern has been fantastic partners with us and our students and alumni. So we really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing your expertise and answering all the questions we had. The information you shared was very helpful. Thank you to our audience for being here today. We hope you will join us next Bryan Breakroom. We're still determining which session date that will be and what the session will be, but they're always varied and exciting. We'll be following up with a survey and a link for to this recording so that you can look back on it. Also, please feel free to connect with Jeff. I believe he's on LinkedIn and happy to connect there if you have any more questions. Fantastic. And we'll try and include that information as well. So thank you so much again and have a lovely day.
See everybody.